The first gunshot of the day rang out just as Priscilla Crawford stepped off the eastbound train into the dusty frontier town of White Pine, Colorado. It was May of 1872, and the air smelled of pine resin, trail dust, and opportunity. She clutched her carpet bag tighter, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake in coming west to take up the schoolteacher position that her late aunt's letter had mentioned. The second gunshot convinced her she had. "Welcome to White Pine, madam," drawled the station master, a weathered man with tobacco-stained whiskers who didn't even flinch at the commotion down the street. "Don't you worry none about that racket. Sheriff'll have it settled 'fore you can count to 10. Priscilla stood frozen, her emerald eyes wide beneath the brim of her modest traveling hat. The elegant daughter of a Boston physician, she had never heard gunfire outside of distant Independence Day celebrations. Now, at 22 years old and entirely alone in the world since her parents' passing last winter, she found herself in a place where violence apparently punctuated everyday conversation. "Is this common?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the sudden swell of shouts from the direction of what appeared to be the town's main street. The station master chuckled. "Nah, that'll be the Yancey brothers again. They get liquored up early on Fridays. Sheriff Tate's been putting up with their nonsense since they was knee-high to grasshoppers." He tipped his hat. "Need help with your trunks, Miss Crawford?" Doc Willard said to expect you on today's train. Before she could answer, the commotion down the street intensified. A man's voice cut through the chaos, deep, authoritative, and strained with what sounded like pain. "Drop it, Billy, I won't tell you twice." Another shot cracked the air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Priscilla gasped as a crowd began to gather, obscuring her view of whatever drama was unfolding. "Looks like the sheriff might need a hand," the station master muttered. "You stay put, miss. I'll send someone for your things." Left alone on the platform, Priscilla debated whether to remain as instructed or seek immediate shelter. Curiosity won out as the crowd parted momentarily, giving her a clear view of the confrontation. A tall man with broad shoulders stood in the middle of the street, facing down a red-faced youth who was waving a pistol wildly. What caught Priscilla's attention, however, was not the gun but the way the taller man stood, weight shifted heavily to his right side, his left leg noticeably stiff. Despite this obvious impairment, there was nothing weak about his stance. He radiated a quiet authority that seemed to fill the street. "Last chance, Billy," the man said, his voice carrying easily to where Priscilla stood. "Your pa wouldn't want this." The younger man's face contorted. "Don't you talk about my pa, you don't know nothing." What happened next unfolded so quickly that Priscilla could hardly follow. The tall man moved with surprising speed despite his apparent disability, knocking the youth's gun arm upward just as it discharged. In the same fluid motion, he twisted the young man around and had him disarmed and subdued in the dust before the echo of the shot had faded. Only then did the man grimace, his face momentarily contorted with pain as he straightened up, hauling his captive to his feet. It was a flash of vulnerability so quickly masked that Priscilla wondered if she'd imagined it. "Someone fetch Doc," the man called out, and Priscilla noticed a dark stain spreading on his left thigh where his buckskin pants were already scarred with old bloodstains. Without thinking, she set down her carpet bag and hurried toward the scene, years of assisting her father in his medical practice overriding her caution. "I can help," she called out, weaving through the dispersing crowd. "My father was a doctor." The man turned toward her voice, and Priscilla found herself fixed in the gaze of the most startlingly blue eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a face that spoke of hardship weathered by sun and wind, marked by a thin scar that traced from just below his right eye to the corner of his mouth. Yet there was something undeniably handsome about the strong lines of his jaw and the intelligence in those eyes, now narrowed with skepticism. "I don't need help, madam," he said, his voice cooler than before. "Especially not from a city lady who looks like she might faint at the sight of blood." Priscilla drew herself up to her full height, which still left her nearly a foot shorter than him. I assure you, sir, I've seen plenty of blood, and that wound needs attention before infection sets in. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a scowl. Doc Willard can see to it when he's done patching up Mrs. Peterson's boy. He nodded toward the young troublemaker now being led away by two other men. You must be the new schoolteacher. Best you get settled in and leave the doctoring to those who know this town. His dismissal stung, but Priscilla was no stranger to men underestimating her. At least let me help you to the doctor's office. You shouldn't be putting weight on that leg. His expression darkened. Don't pity me, Miss Crawford. I've been managing just fine. The words came naturally, rising from someplace deep within her that recognized the pride in this man's stance. Then let me care for you, she said softly, her voice carrying no trace of pity, only a simple offer of human connection. As one newcomer to another. Something shifted in his gaze, surprise, perhaps, or a reluctant appreciation. For a long moment he said nothing, and Priscilla wondered if she'd overstepped. Finally, he released a slow breath. Nathan Ryder, he said, extending his hand, sheriff of White Pine. And I ain't no newcomer, I was born in that cabin up on Miller's Ridge. Priscilla took his calloused hand in her smaller one. Priscilla Crawford, and I believe you're bleeding onto your boots, Sheriff Ryder. For the first time, a hint of a smile touched his lips. So I am, Miss Crawford, so I am. Ignoring the curious stares of White Pine citizens, Priscilla slipped under Sheriff Ryder's right arm, offering her shoulder for support. He hesitated for just a moment before accepting, and together they made their slow way down the dusty main street toward the doctor's office. It was, Priscilla reflected, not at all how she'd imagined her arrival in White Pine would unfold. But as the weight of the wounded sheriff settled against her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose, clear and immediate. Whatever else the West might hold for her, at this moment she was exactly where she needed to be. The doctor's office was a small but tidy building at the end of Main Street. Doc Willard, a white-haired gentleman with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, looked up from bandaging a young boy's arm when Priscilla helped the sheriff through the door. Nate, what in tarnation? Billy Yancey's foolishness again, the doctor sighed, finishing the knot on the boy's bandage. There you are, Tommy. No climbing windmills for at least a week, you hear. The boy nodded solemnly, slid off the examination table, and scurried past Priscilla and Nathan with wide, curious eyes. It's nothing, Doc, Nathan said, reluctantly allowing Priscilla to help him to the table. Bullet just grazed me. Miss Crawford here seems to think I need medical attention. Dr. Willard's eyebrows rose as he took in Priscilla. Ah, our new schoolteacher arrives and immediately starts bossing around our sheriff. I can see you'll fit right in, Miss Crawford. Priscilla felt warmth rising in her cheeks but met the doctor's gaze squarely. My father was Dr. James Crawford of Boston. I assisted him for many years. Crawford, the doctor's expression brightened with recognition. Author of Practical Applications of Modern Surgical Techniques. I have his book, he peered at her with new interest. Well then, perhaps you'd like to assist me. Sheriff Ryder here is a terrible patient. Maybe a fresh face will improve his disposition. Nathan looked ready to protest, but Priscilla was already rolling up her sleeves. I would be delighted, Doctor. I'm right here, you know, Nathan grumbled, but he made no move to leave as Dr. Willard carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric around the wound. Priscilla assessed the injury with a professional eye. The bullet carved a channel through the muscle, but it looks relatively clean. No major vessels hit. Good eye, Dr. Willard nodded approvingly. Would you clean the wound while I prepare the sutures? As Priscilla gently cleaned away the blood, she became acutely aware of Nathan watching her, his blue eyes intent upon her face. Your father taught you medicine, he asked, his voice tight with the pain he was clearly trying to hide. He believed women were just as capable of understanding medicine as men, she replied, keeping her touch gentle but firm. He had no sons, only me, and he said it would be a waste to let a good mind go untrained. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. He sounds like a forward-thinking man. He was, Priscilla said softly, the grief still fresh even after months. Both my parents died in the influenza outbreak last winter. Nathan's gaze softened. I'm sorry for your loss. The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and she had to look away for a moment to compose herself. Thank you. This is how your previous injury happened as well, she asked, nodding toward the obvious old scars that crisscrossed his thigh. Nathan's expression closed off immediately. War wound, Gettysburg. Dr. Willard returned with the suturing materials. Nate was with the 1st Colorado Infantry, came back a hero, though he'll deny it if you ask him. I wasn't a hero, Doc, Nathan said flatly, just a survivor. The doctor met Priscilla's eyes over Nathan's leg, giving her a look that clearly said this was a familiar argument. Miss Crawford, if you could hold the wound edges together while I suture. As they worked together, Priscilla couldn't help but notice how Nathan endured the painful procedure without complaint, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. Only the occasional bead of sweat on his brow betrayed his discomfort. Almost done, Nate, doctor. Willard said, tying off the final suture. You're lucky it was just a graze, though I suppose lucky isn't a word most folks would associate with you, Nathan grimaced. At least Billy's a poor shot. His pa would have been ashamed of how he's handling himself since the accident. Priscilla applied a clean bandage to the wound. Will the young man face charges? He'll cool his heels in my jail until tomorrow, Nathan said, experimentally flexing his leg. Then I'll have a talk with him. Boy's been lost since his father died in that mine collapse last month. The compassion in his voice surprised Priscilla. This hard man with the war-damaged leg wasn't what she'd expected in a frontier sheriff. There was a depth to him that intrigued her. You should stay off that leg for at least a day, she advised, stepping back as he cautiously slid off the table. Nathan tested his weight, wincing slightly. Got a town to keep in order, Miss Crawford, but I appreciate the concern. Dr. Willard shook his head, stubborn as ever. Miss Crawford, since you've shown such aptitude, perhaps you could check the sheriff's wound tomorrow. I'm riding out to the Blackwater Ranch. Their youngest has come down with a fever. Before Priscilla could respond, Nathan cut in. That won't be necessary, Doc. I've been dressing my own wounds since before Miss Crawford here was born. I'm 22, Sheriff, Priscilla said dryly. Unless you were bandaging yourself in infancy, I doubt that's true. A startled laugh escaped Nathan, and for an instant, the hard lines of his face softened into something approaching boyishness. It transformed him so completely that Priscilla found herself momentarily speechless. Doctor. Willard chuckled. She's got you there, Nate. Miss Crawford, I insist. The sheriff's office is just across the street from the schoolhouse where you'll be staying. Perhaps around noon tomorrow. Trapped by politeness and the doctor's expectant expression, Nathan gave a reluctant nod. Fine, noon. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed White Pines Main Street in golden light. Nathan paused at the doctor's porch, leaning slightly on the railing. Where are your things, Miss Crawford? I'll have them sent to the schoolhouse. Still at the station, I'm afraid. I was. Distracted by the commotion. A look that might almost be guilt crossed his face. I'll send Deputy Collins for them right away, least I can do after you helped patch me up. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the events of their unusual introduction hanging between them. Miss Crawford, Nathan finally said, his voice gruff. What you said earlier, about caring rather than pitying. He seemed to struggle with his words, a man clearly more comfortable with action than emotion. I appreciate the distinction. Priscilla smiled, understanding how much the admission cost him. My father always said that pity looks down, but care looks level. I try to live by that. Nathan held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his eyes. Your father sounds like a wise man. White Pine's lucky to have his daughter teaching our children. With that, he touched the brim of his hat and limped away down the street, his broad shoulders straight despite his injury. Priscilla watched him go, aware of a curious feeling in her chest as if something significant had just begun, though she couldn't yet say what. Miss Crawford. Dr. Willard's voice drew her attention back to the porch where he stood. I should warn you, Nathan Ryder is a good man, but the war left more than just physical scars. He doesn't let many people close. Priscilla felt heat rise to her cheeks. I wasn't. The doctor's kind smile stopped her protest. I've known that boy since he was born. 9 years he's been back from the war, and today's the first time I've seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you. He patted her shoulder. Just something to consider, my dear. Now let me show you to the schoolhouse. You must be exhausted after your journey. As they walked the short distance to what would be her new home, Priscilla couldn't help but glance down the street toward the sheriff's office. Through the window, she could see Nathan's silhouette, standing tall despite his injury, watching their progress through the town that was now, for better or worse, her home. The schoolhouse that would serve as both Priscilla's workplace and living quarters stood on the edge of white pine, a simple but sturdy structure of local pine timber. The main room held rows of wooden desks facing a larger teacher's desk and blackboard, while a small apartment consisting of a bedroom, sitting room, and tiny kitchen occupied the back portion of the building. It's not fancy, Doctor. Willard apologized as he showed her around, but the town council had it built just 3 years ago. The wood stove heats the whole place well enough in winter. Priscilla ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. It's perfect, she said truthfully. After the cramped confines of the train, the modest rooms seemed spacious and full of possibility. A bookshelf held a small collection of well-worn primers and readers, and someone had placed a bunch of wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. That would be Emma Hughes, Doctor. Willard said, noticing her gaze on the flowers. She's the midwife and runs the general store with her husband. She'll likely stop by tomorrow to welcome you properly. A sharp knock at the door announced the arrival of Deputy Collins with Priscilla's trunks. The young deputy, barely past boyhood himself with his shock of red hair and freckled face, could barely take his eyes off her as he carried in her belongings. Sheriff Ryder says to tell you he's sorry for the unusual welcome to White Pine, madam, Collins said, finally finding his voice. Says if you need anything at all, the sheriff's office is always open. Thank you, Deputy, Priscilla replied with a smile. Please tell the sheriff I appreciate his concern. After the men departed, Priscilla stood alone in the quiet of her new home. Through the window, she could see the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the western sky. White pine stretched below her, a collection of wooden buildings, the glow of lanterns in windows, the distant sound of a piano from what must be the saloon. It was nothing like Boston with its brick buildings and gaslit streets, its theaters and libraries, its familiar rhythms. Yet as she unpacked her few treasured books and placed her parents' photograph on the bedside table, Priscilla felt a strange sense of rightness. She had come west seeking a fresh start after months of grief, and already the day had brought more adventure than she'd experienced in years of her sheltered eastern life. And then there was Sheriff Ryder Nathan with his war-damaged leg and guarded blue eyes. The man was clearly used to standing alone, to being the strong one despite his injury. What might it be like, she wondered, to be the one he allowed to care for him? The thought brought a warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the evening's lingering heat. You're being ridiculous, Priscilla, she told herself firmly, turning away from the window. The man barely knows you, and you have 28 children to teach starting Monday morning. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself anticipating their meeting the next day with an eagerness that felt suspiciously like the beginnings of something she hadn't expected to find in this dusty frontier town, something that felt remarkably like hope. Morning brought with it the sounds of White Pine awakening roosters crowing, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, voices calling greetings across the street. Priscilla rose early, eager to explore her new home in daylight and prepare her classroom for Monday's lessons. The town looked different in the clear morning light, less intimidating, more welcoming. As she walked down the main street, shopkeepers and residents nodded and called greetings, many introducing themselves and expressing delight at finally having a proper teacher for the town's children. You must be Miss Crawford, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands emerged from the bakery. I'm Martha Wilson. My twins will be in your class. Heaven help you, they're a handful. Would you care for a fresh roll, just out of the oven? Before Priscilla could answer, Martha pressed a warm bundle wrapped in cloth into her hands. "Sheriff Ryder mentioned you helped fix him up yesterday. That man would bleed to death before asking for help, stubborn as they come. But he's the reason we can sleep safe at night, so we all just work around his pride." "He seems very dedicated to the town," Priscilla said carefully, inhaling the heavenly scent of the freshly baked bread. Martha's eyes twinkled. "That he is. Lost his whole family in a fever outbreak when he was serving in the war. This town's all he's got left." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Half the unmarried ladies in the county have set their caps for him over the years, but he never gives them a second glance. Too busy looking after everyone else to think about himself." The bakery door opened again as a customer entered, and Martha excused herself with a friendly wave. Priscilla continued her walk, mulling over this new information about the enigmatic sheriff. By the time she finished her errands and returned to the schoolhouse to organize her classroom supplies, it was nearly noon. She found herself checking her appearance in the small mirror more carefully than usual, smoothing her chestnut hair back into its neat bun and straightening the collar of her blue cotton dress. "This is purely professional," she told her reflection sternly. "He's a patient, not a suitor." The sheriff's office was a solid building in the center of town, with a small jail attached to the back. Priscilla hesitated briefly on the boardwalk outside before squaring her shoulders and entering. The main office was empty except for Nathan, who sat behind his desk with a ledger open before him. He looked up at her entrance, and Priscilla was struck again by the intensity of his blue eyes, like the Colorado sky reflected in the mountain lakes she'd glimpsed from the train. "Miss Crawford," he said, rising stiffly to his feet, punctual as a church bell. "Sheriff," she returned with a nod. "How is your leg feeling today?" he grimaced. "Stiff but serviceable, hardly worth your trouble to come check on it." "I'll be the judge of that," she replied, setting down her small medical bag on his desk. "Please sit and let me examine the wound." For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he lowered himself back into his chair with a barely concealed wince. "Bossy, aren't you?" "I prefer efficiently concerned," she countered, pulling up another chair to sit facing him. "Please roll up your pant leg." Nathan complied with obvious reluctance, revealing the bandaged wound just above his knee. The old scars were more visible in daylight, a map of past suffering etched into his flesh. Priscilla kept her expression professionally neutral as she carefully removed the bandage. "The wound looks clean," she observed, grateful to see no signs of infection. "Doctor Willard did a fine job with the sutures. Had plenty of practice on me over the years," Nathan said dryly. As she cleaned and redressed the wound, Priscilla was acutely aware of his gaze on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her fingers almost fumble the bandage. "Your hands are steady," he remarked. "Most ladies would be squeamish about such things." "My father believed practical skills were more valuable than feminine delicacy," she replied, concentrating on tying off the bandage. "Smart man." When she finished and looked up, Nathan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Respect, perhaps, mixed with something more complex. "Miss Crawford," he said suddenly, "would you allow me to show you around White Pine properly, as an apology for yesterday's welcome?" The invitation surprised her. "That's not necessary, Sheriff. I've already explored a bit this morning." "Nate," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "My friends call me Nate." Something warm unfurled in Priscilla's chest. "Are we friends, then, Sheriff?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Any woman who doesn't flinch at bullet wounds and isn't afraid to order me around is someone I'd like to count as a friend." Priscilla couldn't help but smile in return. "In that case, my friends call me Priscilla, and I would be delighted to see White Pine through your eyes." They ventured out together into the bright Colorado day, Nathan's limp more pronounced than the previous day, but his stride determined. He showed her the landmarks of the small but growing town, the church, the new hotel being constructed on the corner, the mining company office that served as the economic heart of White Pine. "Silver's what brought most folks here," he explained as they walked. The big strike was in '68, right after I got back from the war. Town's tripled in size since then. And before you were sheriff, Priscilla asked. Dr. Willard mentioned you were born here. Nathan nodded toward the distant mountains. My father had a small ranch up near the foothills. Nothing fancy, but it was good land. My brother was supposed to take it over while I was away fighting. A shadow crossed his face. When I got word they'd all died, my parents, my brother and his wife, I thought about selling up, moving on, but this place. He gestured at the town spread before them. It's in my blood. They paused at the edge of town where the schoolhouse stood. From this vantage point, they could see the whole of White Pine nestled in its mountain valley, the pine forests that gave the town its name stretching up the slopes beyond. It's beautiful, Priscilla said softly, genuinely moved by the vista. I can see why you stayed. Nathan turned to look at her, the sunlight catching in his dark hair where a few strands of silver betrayed his 32 years. Why did you come west, Priscilla? Surely a doctor's daughter from Boston had better prospects than teaching in a mining town. The direct question caught her off guard, but something about Nathan's straightforward manner invited honesty. After my parents died, there was nothing left for me there but memories. I could have married. There was a doctor who worked with my father who made his intentions clear, but the thought of settling for a comfortable life without. She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. Without what? Nathan prompted, his voice gentle in a way she hadn't heard before. Priscilla met his gaze directly, without passion, without purpose. James Dr. Wilson was kind and respectable, but when I thought of spending my life with him, I felt nothing. When my aunt wrote about the teaching position here, it felt like a sign. A chance to be useful, to build something of my own. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Most people come west running from something. Sounds like you're running toward something instead. I suppose I am, she replied, touched by his perception. Though I'm not entirely sure what that something is yet. The corner of his mouth lifted in a half smile. Well, Miss Priscilla Crawford, I hope White Pine helps you find it. As they stood there in companionable silence, the weight of his words settled around her like a promise. For the first time since stepping off the train, Priscilla felt certain that coming west had been the right decision after all. The next week passed in a whirlwind as Priscilla settled into her role as White Pine's schoolteacher. Her 28 pupils ranged in age from 6 to 16, some barely literate while others showed remarkable aptitude despite their limited formal education. The Wilson twins Martha had mentioned proved to be bright but mischievous 10-year-old boys who tested her patience daily, while shy Mary Blackwood, the 12-year-old daughter of the mine superintendent, showed a gift for mathematics that would have impressed Priscilla's own teachers at the Boston Female Academy. Each day after school, Priscilla found herself wandering to the sheriff's office to check on Nathan's wound. These visits quickly became the highlight of her days, evolving from brief medical checks to lengthy conversations that often continued as Nathan walked her back to the schoolhouse in the golden light of evening. She learned about his childhood in Colorado Territory, his reluctant but determined service in the war, and his 9 years as sheriff of White Pine. In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, her father's medical practice, and her dreams of someday writing educational texts that would make learning more engaging for children like the ones she now taught. You should do it, Nathan said one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. I've seen how you explain things to the children. You have a gift for making difficult ideas clear. Priscilla smiled, warmed by his confidence in her. Perhaps someday. For now, I'm still learning what these children need. They're so different from the students I tutored in Boston. How so? Nathan asked, stretching his injured leg out before him. The wound was healing well, the limp gradually returning to its usual severity rather than the more pronounced drag of recent days. They're more practical, she replied after a moment's thought. Less concerned with Latin declensions and more interested in how mathematics might help them calculate mining yields or cattle weights. They live in the tangible world. Nathan nodded. Out here, theory doesn't put food on the table or silver in the bank. But that doesn't mean they can't appreciate beauty too. He gestured toward the sunset. Look at that. No painting in a Boston museum could capture it. Priscilla studied his profile in the fading light, struck by the poetry in this ostensibly practical man. Every day revealed new layers to Nathan Ryder, each one more intriguing than the last. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. Priscilla felt a blush warm her cheeks. "That you continually surprise me, Sheriff Ryder," his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Good. I'd hate to be predictable." The moment hung between them, charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Then the church bell rang the hour, breaking the spell. "I should go," Nathan said, rising stiffly. "Got night rounds to make." "Of course." Priscilla stood as well, suddenly awkward. "Thank you for walking me home." He tipped his hat, his expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. "My pleasure, Miss Crawford. Sleep well." She watched him limp away down the path, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the last glow of sunset, and wondered when exactly Sheriff Nathan Ryder had begun to occupy so many of her thoughts. The following Saturday morning, Emma Hughes from the general store appeared at Priscilla's door with an invitation that couldn't be refused. "The whole town's gathering for the spring dance tonight at the hotel," Emma explained, her warm brown eyes twinkling. "Nothing fancy, mind you, but we do clean up nice when the occasion calls for it. You simply must come. Everyone's eager to welcome you properly." "A dance?" Priscilla hesitated, thinking of her limited wardrobe. "I'm not sure I have anything suitable." Emma waved away her concern. "Your Sunday dress will do fine. This ain't Boston society, dear, though," she added with a knowing smile. "I happen to have some lovely blue ribbon that would match your eyes perfectly. A little trimming can work wonders." By sunset, Priscilla found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Emma's little trimming had transformed her plain gray silk dress into something almost fashionable, with blue ribbons adorning the bodice and sleeves. She had left her hair in a simpler style than her usual severe bun, with soft tendrils framing her face. "It's just a community gathering," she told her reflection, trying to calm the flutter of nerves in her stomach that had nothing to do with meeting her pupil's parents and everything to do with a certain blue-eyed sheriff. The hotel's main dining room had been cleared for dancing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the assembled townsfolk. A small band consisting of a fiddle, banjo, and piano played lively tunes in the corner, and already several couples were twirling across the wooden floor. "Miss Crawford," Martha Wilson bustled over, resplendent in a burgundy dress that had clearly seen better days but was worn with dignity. "Don't you look lovely? Come, let me introduce you to everyone properly." For the next half hour, Priscilla found herself passed from one group to another, meeting miners and merchants, farmers and craftsmen, all eager to share their opinions on education and their hopes for their children's futures. She was in the midst of a conversation with Mr. Blackwood, the mine superintendent, when a stir at the entrance caught her attention. Nathan stood in the doorway, and for a moment, Priscilla didn't recognize him. Gone was the dusty sheriff with his practical work clothes. In their place stood a man transformed clean-shaven, his dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit that, while not new, fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Only the silver star pinned to his lapel and the telltale stiffness in his left leg identified him as the same Nathan Ryder who had been walking her home all week. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything else seemed to fade away: the music, the chatter, the warm press of bodies. Nathan nodded once, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth, before he was surrounded by townspeople eager to greet him. "Sheriff cleans up nice, doesn't he?" Mr. Blackwood remarked, following her gaze. "Don't often see him at these gatherings. Man usually claims he's needed on patrol." Before Priscilla could formulate a response that wouldn't betray her suddenly racing pulse, the music changed to a waltz, and Mr. Blackwood gallantly offered his arm. "May I have this dance, Miss Crawford?" She accepted with a smile, allowing herself to be led onto the dance floor. As they moved through the steps, she couldn't help but seek out Nathan in the crowd. He stood at the edge of the room, deep in conversation with Dr. Willard, but his eyes kept finding hers as she danced. After Mr. Blackwood, there was young Deputy Collins, then the elderly but spry Mr. Peterson, each claiming a dance. Priscilla laughed and conversed, feeling more welcome and at home than she had since arriving in White Pine. Yet through it all, she remained acutely aware of Nathan's presence, like a compass needle constantly orienting to true north. During a brief pause while the musicians refreshed themselves, Priscilla found herself alone for a moment near the punch bowl. A familiar voice behind her sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm beginning to think I'll never get my turn," Nathan said quietly. "You're a popular addition to our town, Miss Crawford." She turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close he stood. "Sheriff Ryder." "I was beginning to think you didn't dance." Something complicated flickered in his eyes. "Not usually, but for you I might make an exception." The simple statement, delivered in his deep voice, made Priscilla's breath catch. "Your leg can manage one dance," he finished for her. "If you're willing." The music began again, a slower waltz this time. Nathan held out his hand and Priscilla placed hers in it without hesitation. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin, sending a current of awareness up her arm. As he led her onto the floor, she noticed how he adjusted his steps to accommodate his damaged leg, not in a way that drew attention, but with a subtle grace born of long practice. His right hand rested lightly at her waist, maintaining a respectable distance between them, yet Priscilla felt the warmth of his touch as keenly as if no layers of fabric separated his skin from hers. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured as they turned in a careful circle. Nathan's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Let them. I'm dancing with the prettiest woman in the room. A man's allowed to be a little proud of that." The compliment, delivered without artifice or flattery, warmed Priscilla to her core. "I think the altitude must be affecting your eyesight, Sheriff." He chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "My eyesight's just fine. It's my leg that's damaged, not my ability to appreciate beauty." They moved together in perfect harmony, as if they had danced 100 times before. When the music finally ended, Nathan kept hold of her hand for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Would you step outside for some air?" he asked quietly. "It's getting mighty warm in here." The night air was cool and refreshing after the heat of the crowded room. Stars blanketed the sky above White Pine, more than Priscilla had ever seen in Boston's light-polluted skies. They walked slowly to the hotel's small garden, where a bench offered a view of the moonlit mountains. "You're fitting in well here," Nathan observed as they sat down. "The town's taken to you." Priscilla smiled, surprised to realize how true his words were. "It feels more like home than I expected. The children are wonderful and everyone has been so welcoming." "And yet," Nathan prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her voice. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "And yet there are moments when I miss the libraries, the lectures, the intellectual life of Boston. Is that terribly ungrateful?" "Not at all," he replied, his voice gentle. "White Pine has its charms, but it's not exactly a cultural center, though." He paused, seeming to debate with himself before continuing. "I do have a small library. Books were my mother's passion. She brought as many as she could when they came west. I've added to it over the years." Priscilla turned to him in surprise. "You have a library in your home?" Nathan nodded, a slight flush visible even in the moonlight. "Nothing like what you're used to, I'm sure, but you'd be welcome to borrow anything that interests you." The offer touched her deeply, not just for the books themselves, but for what it revealed about this complex man. "I would like that very much." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant strains of music floating from the hotel. When Nathan spoke again, his voice had a different quality, hesitant, almost vulnerable. "Priscilla, I need to ask you something." Her heart quickened at his use of her first name. "Yes. These past 2 weeks you've checked my wound every day. It's nearly healed now." "Yes, it's coming along nicely," she agreed, wondering where he was leading. Nathan turned slightly to face her, his blue eyes intense even in the dim light. "When it's fully healed, will you still come by the sheriff's office?" Or will our paths only cross when there's trouble at the school? The question laid bare something that had been building between them, a connection that had grown far beyond doctor and patient, beyond even casual friendship. I think, Priscilla said carefully, her pulse fluttering in her throat, that even without medical necessity I would find reasons to see the sheriff of White Pine. He's become important to me. Nathan's hand found hers on the bench between them, his fingers warm as they curled around hers. Good, because I find myself looking forward to your visits more than is probably proper for a town sheriff. The admission hung between them like a promise. Priscilla was acutely aware of his closeness, of the slight tilt of his head as he leaned toward her, of her own breath catching in anticipation. A sudden burst of laughter from the hotel doorway shattered the moment as a group of revelers spilled into the night air. Nathan straightened immediately, though he didn't release her hand. "We should go back in," he said, regret coloring his voice. "People will talk." Priscilla squeezed his hand once before letting go. "Let them talk. I've never much cared for gossip." The smile that spread across Nathan's face transformed him, erasing the lines of pain and responsibility that usually marked his features. "You're a remarkable woman, Priscilla Crawford." As they walked back toward the bright lights and music of the dance, Priscilla felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them, something that, like the silver beneath White Pine's rocky soil, promised treasure for those patient enough to mine its depths. The weeks that followed the spring dance unfolded like the mountain wildflowers that began to carpet the meadows around White Pine gradually at first, then in a sudden riot of color that transformed the landscape. Similarly, what had begun as cautious friendship between Priscilla and Nathan bloomed into something neither could deny nor easily define. True to his word, Nathan invited Priscilla to his home the Sunday after the dance, a modest but well-built cabin on the edge of town that had once belonged to his parents. The main room was dominated by bookshelves that reached from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry and mining to leather-bound classics of literature and philosophy. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father," Nathan explained as Priscilla ran her fingers reverently along the spines. "She believed education was the greatest gift she could give her sons, even out here in the wilderness." "She was right," Priscilla said softly, pulling out a well-worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. "These are wonderful, Nathan." He watched her with a mixture of pride and something deeper as she explored his literary treasures. "Take whatever you'd like." "They've been sitting here too long without being properly appreciated." That first visit established a pattern. Each Sunday after church, Priscilla would come to Nathan's cabin for dinner, which he insisted on cooking himself, revealing a surprising talent in the kitchen and conversation that often lasted well into the evening. They would discuss books they'd both read, debate politics, where their opinions often differed dramatically, and share stories of their vastly different upbringings. During the week, Nathan made it a habit to walk Priscilla home from school, his sheriff's duties mysteriously always concluding in time to meet her as the last student departed. Sometimes they would stop at the cafe for coffee, or simply walk along the creek that ran behind the town, watching the beaver colonies build their dams and discussing the day's events. The townsfolk noticed, of course. White Pine was too small for such regular meetings to go unremarked, but to Priscilla's surprise, there seemed to be more approval than censure in the glances and comments that followed them. "You've softened him," Emma Hughes remarked one day as Priscilla purchased supplies for her classroom. "Used to be he'd barely crack a smile from one month to the next. Now he's almost personable when he comes in for his coffee." Dr. Willard was more direct. "Never thought I'd see the day when Nathan Ryder courted a woman," he said during Priscilla's regular check-in about the town's children's health. "Man's been hiding behind that badge and his war wounds for nearly a decade. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. It's good medicine." Yet for all the time they spent together, for all the deepening affection evident in Nathan's blue eyes whenever they met, he maintained a careful physical distance. Since that almost kiss at the spring dance, he had limited himself to the merest brush of fingers when passing a book or helping her over a rocky patch of trail. It was as if he had drawn an invisible line between them that he would not cross, though Priscilla increasingly found herself wishing he would. The situation came to a head one stormy afternoon in late May. Priscilla had dismissed her students early as thunder rumbled over the mountains and dark clouds gathered ominously. She was closing up the schoolhouse when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour that drummed against the roof with impressive force. Resigned to getting soaked on her short walk home, she was gathering her books when the door burst open, revealing Nathan, breathless and already damp from the rain. "Thought I might catch you before you tried to walk home in this," he said, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "It's coming down like Noah's flood out there." Relief and something warmer flooded through Priscilla at the sight of him. "My hero," she said with a smile, only half joking, "though now you're soaked for your troubles." Nathan shrugged, removing his wet coat and hat and hanging them by the door. "Better me than you. Looks like we might be stuck here a while. That creek behind town floods something fierce in storms like this. The path to your place will be underwater already." A crack of thunder punctuated his words, followed by a flash of lightning that briefly illuminated the classroom in stark white light. Priscilla jumped despite herself, and Nathan moved instinctively toward her before stopping himself a few feet away. "Not fond of storms?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "They always make me nervous. Irrational, I know. Not irrational at all, nature reminding us who's really in charge." He glanced around the classroom. "Got any coffee? Might as well make ourselves comfortable." They retreated to Priscilla's small kitchen where she stoked the wood stove and set water to boil. The domesticity of the moment, Nathan sitting at her tiny table while she prepared coffee, the rain creating a cocoon of sound around them, struck Priscilla with a pang of longing so acute it nearly took her breath away. "What is it?" Nathan asked, catching her expression as she handed him a steaming cup. Priscilla hesitated, then decided that after nearly 2 months of this careful dance between them, honesty was required. "I was just thinking how right this feels. You here in my kitchen, us together." Nathan's hands tightened around the cup, his knuckles whitening slightly. "Priscilla, why won't you kiss me, Nathan?" The question escaped before she could reconsider, hanging in the air between them like the charged particles before lightning strikes. His eyes widened, then darkened with an emotion that made her pulse quicken. "You know why?" "Actually, I don't," she countered, setting down her own cup and moving to stand before him. "I've imagined many reasons: my Eastern background, your position as sheriff, some sense of propriety, but none of them seem adequate given what I believe we both feel." Nathan's jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath his tanned skin. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," she urged, her voice softening. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Nathan Ryder, and I hope you might be falling in love with me too." The admission seemed to physically impact him, his breath coming out in a rush as if he'd been struck. He stood abruptly, moving to the window where the rain lashed against the glass. "You deserve better," he said finally, his voice rough. "A whole man, someone without the nightmares, without the damaged leg, without the burden of a badge that means any day might be my last." Priscilla moved to stand behind him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body but not touching him. "Do you think so little of me that you believe I care about any of that?" He turned to face her, his expression anguished. "It's because I think so highly of you that I can't let myself be selfish. You're young, brilliant, beautiful. You could have any man in this territory." "I don't want any man," she said simply. "I want you, with your limp and your nightmares and your badge. I want the man who loves books and can cook a better stew than anyone in Boston. The man who treats every child in my classroom with respect, even Billy Yancey, who gives everyone else nothing but trouble." Nathan's hands came up to frame her face, his touch so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. "I'm 9 years older than you. I wake up some nights believing I'm back at Gettysburg, surrounded by dying men. Some days the pain in my leg is so bad I can barely walk. Is that really the life you want?" Yes, Priscilla whispered, covering his hands with her own. Because it's your life and I want to share it. All of it, the pain and the joy, the nightmares and the quiet moments like this. For a heartbeat, she thought he might pull away again. Instead, with a sound that was half surrender and half desire, Nathan closed the distance between them and kissed her. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft against hers. The kiss tentative at first, as if he still expected her to come to her senses and push him away. When she instead wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed closer, the kiss transformed into something deeper and more urgent. Priscilla had been kissed before chaste pecks from suitors in Boston, mostly but never like this. Never with a passion that made her feel as though she might combust from the inside out. Nathan kissed her as though she were water in the desert, oxygen after too long underwater, salvation after damnation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you told me not to pity you," he admitted, his voice husky. Priscilla smiled, her heart too full for words. Instead, she pulled him down for another kiss, letting her actions speak what her voice could not yet articulate. That in this moment, with the rain drumming on the roof and Nathan's arms around her, she had found the purpose she'd been seeking when she journeyed west. Not in the schoolhouse or the town, but in the heart of this complicated, honorable man who had somehow become the center of her world. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the walls of the schoolhouse, Priscilla and Nathan found shelter in each other's arms, a haven neither had expected, but both now recognized as home. The summer of 1872 unfolded in a series of perfect days that Priscilla would later recall as the happiest of her life. With school dismissed for the season, she split her time between preparing lessons for the fall term, helping Dr. Willard with his rounds, and spending every possible moment with Nathan. Their courtship progressed with a speed that might have scandalized Boston society, but seemed perfectly natural in the more practical atmosphere of the frontier. Life was too uncertain, too precious to waste on extended formalities when hearts were already decided. Nathan taught Priscilla to ride, a skill she'd never acquired in the city, and together, they explored the breathtaking countryside around White Pine. They picnicked beside mountain streams where trout flashed silver in the clear water, climbed to meadows carpeted with columbine and Indian paintbrush, and visited the small ranch that had been in Nathan's family, now managed by a trusted foreman while Nathan fulfilled his duties as sheriff. "It's still yours," Priscilla observed as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant peaks. "The way you speak of it, the care you take with every decision about the stock and grazing, you love this land." Nathan nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "Always thought I'd live my life here, raise a family like my father did. Then the war came, and after." He absently rubbed his damaged thigh. "Seemed like the sheriff's badge needed me more than the ranch did." "And now?" Priscilla asked, turning to study his profile in the fading light. A smile touched his lips as he met her gaze. "Now I'm wondering if maybe it's time to reconsider my priorities. Town's grown enough to support a full-time sheriff who isn't me. Collins is young, but he's learning fast." The implication in his words sent a thrill through Priscilla. They hadn't spoken directly of marriage, but it hovered between them like a promise waiting to be voiced. Their private happiness was interrupted in early July when a telegram arrived for Nathan from Denver. Priscilla was with him in the sheriff's office when the message was delivered, and she watched with growing concern as his expression darkened while reading it. "Bad news?" she asked when he finally set the paper down. Nathan's jaw was tight, the lines around his mouth deepened with tension. "The Baldwin gang broke out of the territorial prison 3 days ago. 4 men, all armed and dangerous. They've already killed 2 guards and a farmer who had the misfortune to cross their path." Priscilla's hand went to her throat. "That's terrible, but surely they wouldn't come to White Pine." "It's so remote." "That's exactly why they might," Nathan said grimly. "Remote means fewer lawmen, easier to hide out, and their leader, Jake Baldwin, has a personal grudge against me. I'm the one who put him away 3 years ago." Fear clutched at Priscilla's heart. "What will you do?" My job, he answered simply. I'll send word to neighboring towns to be on alert, organize some extra patrols. He reached across the desk to take her hand. Don't worry, they may not come this way at all. But the shadow of the Baldwin gang hung over the town in the days that followed. Nathan was constantly on patrol, often returning late at night, exhausted from riding the boundaries of his jurisdiction. The carefree quality of their summer idyll faded as White Pines citizens began locking doors that had previously stood open and keeping children closer to home. 2 weeks after the telegram, Priscilla was alone in the schoolhouse organizing books for the fall term when Nathan appeared in the doorway. One look at his face told her something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, setting down the primer she'd been reviewing. "Baldwin and his men were spotted 20 miles north of here yesterday," he said without preamble. "They robbed the stage to Silverton, shot the driver." Priscilla's stomach clenched. "Is he—" "Alive, barely. They're bringing him to Doc Willard now." Nathan stepped fully into the room, his expression grave. "Priscilla, I need you to listen carefully. While this threat exists, I want you staying in town, preferably with Emma and her husband or at the hotel. No more rides into the countryside, no visits to the ranch." She nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. "Of course, but what about you? If this man has a personal vendetta, I'll be fine," Nathan cut her off, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "I've dealt with men like Baldwin before." He crossed to where she stood and pulled her into an embrace so tight it nearly took her breath away. "Just promise me you'll be careful," he murmured into her hair. "I promise," she whispered against his chest, trying to ignore the foreboding that settled like lead in her stomach. "But you must promise the same." Instead of answering, Nathan tilted her face up and kissed her with an intensity that spoke of fear and need, and something deeper, a desperation that frightened her more than his words had. When he finally pulled away, his blue eyes were dark with emotion. "I love you, Priscilla Crawford. Whatever happens, don't ever doubt that." Before she could respond, he was gone, the echo of his uneven footsteps fading down the schoolhouse steps. The next 3 days passed in a haze of tension. Nathan organized a volunteer militia from among the town's able-bodied men, posting guards at key locations around White Pine. He himself seemed to be everywhere at once, checking defenses, riding patrols, coordinating with neighboring settlements. Priscilla saw him only in snatched moments, a brief visit to Emma's home where she was staying, a hurried conversation on the street, a late-night knock at the window that led to desperate kisses and whispered reassurances before he disappeared again into the darkness. On the 4th day, the nightmare Priscilla had been dreading became reality. She was helping in Dr. Willard's office, tending to the wounded stage driver whose condition had stabilized, when the first shots rang out from the north edge of town. The sound of galloping hooves and men's shouts followed, then more gunfire, closer this time. "They're here," the doctor said grimly, reaching for his medical bag. "Get inside the back room with Mr. Jenkins, Priscilla. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or Nathan." She wanted to protest, to insist on helping, but one look at the elderly doctor's determined face stopped her. Instead, she helped move the injured driver to the small back room that served as a surgery, securing the heavy door behind them. Through the small window, she could see chaos erupting in the street, townspeople running for cover, the flash of gunfire, horses rearing in panic. Her heart hammered in her chest as she searched desperately for a glimpse of Nathan among the defenders. A sudden crash from the front of the building told her someone had broken into the doctor's office. Mr. Jenkins moaned softly from the cot, and Priscilla placed a warning hand on his arm, reaching with her other hand for the heavy paperweight on the doctor's desk, a poor weapon, but better than nothing. The door splintered inward before she could move, revealing a hulking man with a wild beard and a bleeding gash across his forehead. His eyes, feverish with pain and rage, fixed on Priscilla with malevolent intent. "Well, well," he growled, raising his pistol. "What have we here?" A pretty little nurse. Priscilla straightened to her full height, placing herself between the intruder and the wounded man. "This is a medical facility. This man is critically injured. If you have any humanity left, you'll leave us in peace." The man laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Humanity. Sweetheart, I left that behind in prison. Now you're coming with me. Ryder's woman will make a fine bargaining chip. Ice flooded Priscilla's veins. How did he know who she was? As if reading her thoughts, the man's grin widened. Oh yes, we've been watching. Saw you and the sheriff making eyes at each other yesterday. Man's got a weakness after all. He gestured with his gun. Come along now, nice and quiet. Priscilla's mind raced. If she went with him, she'd become a weapon to use against Nathan. If she refused. Her gaze fell on the wounded driver, who watched the scene with helpless terror. A shot rang out from the doorway, and the intruder staggered forward with a howl of pain, blood blossoming on his shoulder. Behind him stood Deputy Collins, his young face grim as he leveled his smoking gun. Next one goes in your head, Collins said with a steadiness that belied his youth. Drop the weapon and get on the floor. The wounded outlaw hesitated, clearly calculating his odds. Another shot from outside seemed to decide him, and he lowered his gun with a curse. Miss Crawford, are you hurt? Collins asked, keeping his weapon trained on the outlaw as he secured the man's gun. No, we're both unharmed, Priscilla replied, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. What's happening out there? Baldwin and 2 of his men rode into town shooting. Sheriff Ryder and the volunteers have them pinned down at the saloon, Collins explained as he bound the outlaw's hands. This one must have split off looking for hostages. Fresh gunfire erupted from the direction of the saloon, followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Collins's face tightened with worry. I need to get back out there. Can you keep an eye on this snake until I can get someone to take him to the jail? Priscilla picked up the outlaw's dropped pistol, forcing herself to grip it steadily despite her revulsion. Go, we'll be fine. As Collins disappeared, Priscilla positioned herself where she could watch both the wounded outlaw and the door, praying silently for Nathan's safety. The minutes crawled by, punctuated by sporadic gunfire that gradually died away to an eerie silence. When the door finally opened again, it was Emma's husband, Thomas, his normally jovial face grim. Miss Crawford, you need to come, it's the sheriff. The world seemed to tilt beneath Priscilla's feet. Is he? Alive, Thomas assured her quickly, but hurt bad. Doc's with him at your schoolhouse, it was closest. Asked me to bring you. Priscilla barely remembered handing off the prisoner or the frantic run through town to the schoolhouse. All she could focus on was the mantra in her head, alive. He's alive. The schoolroom had been transformed into a makeshift hospital. Nathan lay on a table that had been cleared of books and papers, his shirt cut away, his chest and left shoulder wrapped in bloody bandages. Doctor. Willard worked with swift efficiency, but his face betrayed the seriousness of the situation. Bullet went clean through the shoulder, he reported as Priscilla rushed to his side. That one's not the problem, it's the one in his chest I'm worried about. Too close to his heart to risk removing it here, but too dangerous to move him to Denver. Priscilla swallowed hard, forcing herself to think like her father's daughter rather than a woman terrified of losing the man she loved. What can I do? Help me stabilize him for now. Then pray he's as stubborn about living as he is about everything else. The next hours passed in a blur of blood and fear. Priscilla worked alongside Dr. Willard, drawing on everything her father had taught her. They managed to stop the bleeding and clean the wounds, but Nathan remained unconscious, his breathing shallow, his skin burning with fever. What happened? Priscilla asked when there was finally nothing more they could do but wait. Baldwin, Dr. Willard nodded wearily. Nathan confronted him directly at the saloon, drew fire away from the volunteers, took down Baldwin and one of his men before he was hit. And Baldwin, dead, along with 2 of his gang, the one you helped capture is the only survivor. Relief mingled with fear as Priscilla turned back to Nathan's still form. The immediate threat was gone, but at what cost? You should rest, Dr. Willard said gently. I can watch him. Priscilla shook her head. I'm staying, he wouldn't leave me and I won't leave him. The doctor didn't argue, simply patted her shoulder and moved to check on other wounded townsfolk who had been brought in. Alone with Nathan, Priscilla took his hand in hers, shocked at how cold it felt despite his fever. "Don't you dare die, Nathan Ryder," she whispered fiercely. "Not now. Not when we've only just found each other." Whether it was her voice or simply coincidence, his fingers twitched slightly in hers. Encouraged, she continued talking, pouring out her heart in a way she might not have dared had he been conscious. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you said not to pity you. You're the strongest, most honorable man I've ever known, and if you think your leg or your nightmares or anything else makes you less worthy of love, then you're a fool." Tears streamed down her face unchecked. "We have too much left to do together, too many books to read, too many sunsets to watch. You promised to teach me to fish, remember? And I still haven't seen snow on those mountains you love so much." Through the night she talked, telling him stories of her childhood, reciting poetry they'd read together, making plans for a future she refused to believe might not come. When her voice gave out, she simply held his hand, willing her strength into his body. Dawn was breaking when Nathan's fingers finally curled around hers with purpose. His eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing the blue eyes she'd feared she might never see again. "Priscilla," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I'm here," she assured him, fresh tears spilling over. "Don't try to talk, you're going to be fine." A ghost of his familiar half-smile touched his lips. "Heard you, all night, couldn't find my way back, until your voice." Priscilla leaned down to press her forehead against his. "Then I'll keep talking for as long as it takes. Just stay with me, Nathan, stay with me." His eyes held hers, conveying what his weakened body couldn't yet express. "Always," he whispered, "not going anywhere without you. It was enough, it had to be enough." As the sun rose over White Pine, casting golden light through the schoolhouse windows, Priscilla allowed herself to believe that their story was far from over. Nathan's recovery was slow and fraught with setbacks. The bullet lodged near his heart couldn't be safely removed, and Dr. Willard warned that it might cause complications for the rest of his life. The wound in his shoulder healed more quickly but left his arm temporarily weakened, adding to the challenges posed by his already damaged leg. Through it all, Priscilla rarely left his side. She moved her belongings back to the schoolhouse, converting her small sitting room into a bedroom for Nathan once he was strong enough to be moved from the improvised hospital bed in the classroom. As July faded into August, White Pine slowly returned to normal. The Baldwin gang's reign of terror was over, and the town had a new hero in Sheriff Ryder, whose actions had unquestionably saved lives. Deputy Collins stepped up admirably in Nathan's absence, handling day-to-day law enforcement with a maturity beyond his years. For Priscilla, the summer became a lesson in patience and faith. Each small improvement in Nathan's condition the day his fever finally broke, the first time he managed to sit up unaided, his first halting steps across the room was a victory to be celebrated. Each setback the night his wound became infected, requiring Dr. Willard to reopen and clean it. The days when pain left him pale and withdrawn was a challenge to be overcome together. It was during these difficult weeks that Priscilla truly came to understand the depth of Nathan's character. Despite pain that would have left many men bitter and self-pitying, he maintained the quiet dignity she had admired from the beginning. On good days, he read to the children who came to visit their teacher and the wounded sheriff who had become something of a local legend. On bad days, he gritted his teeth and pushed himself to rebuild his strength, refusing to surrender to the limitations of his injured body. And in the quiet evenings, when it was just the two of them, they talked of the future tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. "I've been thinking," Nathan said one night as they sat on the schoolhouse porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering twilight. His strength had returned enough that he could walk short distances with a cane, though his limp was more pronounced than before. About what comes next. Priscilla, who had been reading aloud from Emerson's essays, marked her place with a finger. "And what conclusions have you reached, Sheriff?" He smiled at the teasing formality in her tone. "That I'm not going back to the badge. Collins has proven himself these past weeks. The town council's already approached me about making his appointment permanent. How do you feel about that?" she asked carefully, aware of how much the sheriff's star had defined Nathan's identity since his return from the war. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Ready, he finally said. Ready to live for something beyond duty. The ranch has been neglected too long. It's a big change, Priscilla observed. Are you sure? Nathan turned to her, his blue eyes clear and certain in the fading light. Only if you'll come with me. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I had this ordered from Denver before Baldwin. It arrived yesterday. Priscilla's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at twice its normal speed. Nathan. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. It's not as fine as what you might have had in Boston, but it's beautiful, she interrupted, her vision blurring with tears. Nathan took her hand in his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. Priscilla Crawford, I love you more than I believed it was possible to love another person. These past weeks, having you care for me, seeing your strength and courage. It would be the greatest honor of my life if you would consent to be my wife. For all her education and love of words, Priscilla found only one that mattered in that moment. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Nathan, yes. The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her hand alone. When Nathan pulled her into his arms, his kiss was both gentle and fierce, a promise of the life they would build together. You understand what you're getting? He asked when they finally drew apart, his forehead resting against hers. A man with a permanent limp, a bullet near his heart, and nightmares that might never fully fade. Priscilla cupped his face in her hands, making him meet her gaze directly. I'm getting you, Nathan Ryder, all of you. The wounds are part of what made you the man I love, and I wouldn't change a single thing about you. She smiled, stroking his cheek. Besides, every marriage has its challenges. Ours will simply be more visible than some. He laughed then, the sound free in a way she had never heard before. God, I love you, he said, pulling her close again. When shall we tell the town? Tomorrow, Priscilla decided. Tonight is just for us. As the stars emerged above White Pine and the mountain air cooled with the promise of autumn, Nathan and Priscilla remained on the porch, planning their shared future in quiet voices. The schoolhouse would need a new teacher, perhaps the young woman from New York who had written inquiring about opportunities in the West. The ranch would need attention before winter set in, though Thomas Hughes had assured them the cattle were in good condition. The wedding would be simple but joyful, held in the town church before the first snow fell. It was, Priscilla reflected as she leaned against Nathan's solid warmth, not the life she had imagined when she boarded the eastbound train to Colorado 4 months earlier. It was better, richer, more challenging, and infinitely more rewarding than anything she could have dreamed. The wedding of Nathan Ryder and Priscilla Crawford took place on the first Sunday of October, just as the aspen trees surrounding White Pine turned to gold against the evergreen backdrop of pine and spruce. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the small church to capacity and spilling onto the grounds outside. Priscilla wore a gown of ivory silk that Emma and Martha had worked tirelessly to create, incorporating lace from her mother's wedding dress that she had brought from Boston. Nathan, standing tall and proud at the altar despite the pain that still occasionally shadowed his face, looked at her with such naked adoration as she walked toward him that several of the town's more sentimental ladies were moved to tears. Never seen a man more in love, Doctor. Willard remarked to Deputy Collins, now officially Sheriff Collins, as they watched the couple exchange vows. Or a woman more perfectly suited to handle that particular man. Handle, Collins grinned. Miss Crawford, Mrs. Ryder now doesn't handle the sheriff, she partners with him. That's what makes them work. It was an insightful observation from the young lawman, and one that proved prophetic as Nathan and Priscilla began their life together at the Ryder Ranch. The transition wasn't without challenges. Nathan's injuries meant some ranch tasks were beyond him now, requiring hired help for the heavy work. The bullet near his heart occasionally caused alarming episodes of weakness or irregular heartbeats that frightened Priscilla more than she let on. And true to his warning, The nightmares persisted nights when he woke shouting, disoriented, reliving horrors she could only imagine. But there were far more joys than sorrows. The ranch flourished under their combined care, with Nathan's practical knowledge complemented by Priscilla's organizational skills and fresh perspectives. They expanded the house, adding a proper library with floor-to-ceiling shelves that soon filled with books ordered from Denver and even Boston. True to her promise to Dr. Willard, Priscilla continued to assist with medical matters in White Pine, riding into town twice weekly to help with patients and maintaining a small infirmary at the ranch for emergencies. In time, her reputation as a skilled healer spread beyond the town, bringing people from neighboring settlements seeking the doctor lady when conventional medicine failed them. Nathan found purpose beyond the badge in breeding and training horses, developing a line of sure-footed mountain stock that commanded premium prices throughout the territory. His limp and damaged body proved no hindrance to his natural affinity with the animals, and watching him work with a spirited colt became one of Priscilla's greatest pleasures. Their first child, a son they named James after Priscilla's father, arrived in the summer of 1874, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Nathan's mother. Both children inherited their father's striking blue eyes and their mother's quick intelligence, growing strong and healthy in the clear mountain air. By the time their third child, Matthew, joined the family in 1879, the Ryder Ranch had become a central part of White Pine's community, a place where travelers could find shelter in a storm, where neighboring ranchers gathered to share news and solve common problems, where children came for the impromptu school sessions Priscilla still couldn't resist conducting. Through it all, the foundation of their life together remained the promise made that stormy afternoon in the schoolhouse, not of perfection or ease, but of unwavering care, of looking at each other level rather than down, of facing each challenge as partners rather than protector and protected. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Priscilla with a special gift, a small bound book containing the story of their meeting and courtship, painstakingly written in his strong, clear hand over many secret late nights. "I wanted our children to know," he explained as she turned the pages with tears in her eyes, "how their mother saw past a damaged man's pride to the heart beneath, how she taught me that being cared for isn't the same as being pitied." Priscilla closed the book gently and placed it on the table beside them. "And I want them to know how their father's courage isn't about never falling, but about rising again each time life knocks him down. How his strength lies not in never needing help, but in accepting it with grace when it's offered with love." Nathan pulled her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been that first day in White Pine, despite the passage of years and the accumulation of scars. "We've had a good life, haven't we, despite everything?" "Not despite everything," Priscilla corrected, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady, if sometimes irregular, beat of his heart. "Because of everything. Every challenge, every triumph, every moment they all led us here." Outside their window, the Colorado sunset painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold, a beauty so familiar now that they sometimes forgot to marvel at it. Their children's laughter drifted from the barn where they were helping with the evening chores, a sound that never failed to remind Nathan and Priscilla of how richly they had been blessed. "I love you, Priscilla Ryder," Nathan murmured against her hair. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss, "every part of you just as you are." As twilight deepened into night over the ranch that had become their kingdom, Nathan and Priscilla remained by the window, hands clasped, hearts beating in time, two souls who had found in each other not completion, but expansion. Not rescue, but partnership, not pity, but the far greater gift of care freely given and gratefully received.